Good morning, members. Good morning. I'm Emma Hunter, Democratic Services Officer here at the County Council. As both the Chairman and the Vice Chairman have given apologies today, the first item of business is to elect a chair for this meeting. I understand that Councillor Lynette Bowers-Flint has been nominated to chair. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Henry. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Grundy.
Happy to second.
Are there any further nominations? I see no further nominations, in which case can we have a show of hands for Councillor Lynette Bowers-Flint, please? That is unanimous. So I will now hand over to Councillor Bowers-Flint.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, members. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Development and Regulation Committee, held today in Committee Room 1. Before I open the formal part of the meeting, I have a few housekeeping points I need to read out. This room does have automatic cameras and sound tracking with microphones in the ceiling. Given this, I would like to remind members of a couple of things. Please continue to speak clearly and do not whisper. Please keep other sounds to a minimum. Whispering, shuffling of papers and typing loudly on your keyboard may bring the camera onto you. Please also bear in mind that the ceiling microphones are sensitive and may pick up conversations in the room, including informal remarks. And finally, please refrain from using a mobile phone, as when the camera zooms, it will not only capture the speaker, but those sitting next to them as well. The last 2 points are particularly important as we are live streaming the meeting on YouTube, and a recording of the meeting will be available at any time on that channel. We're not expecting a fire drill this morning, so if the alarm should sound, please follow officers out of the doors at the side of the room and leave the building via the nearest fire exit, which will be down the stairs in the foyer and into Duke Street, where you will then make your way to the location assembly point in the grounds of the cathedral opposite you. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is membership apologies, substitutions and declarations of interest. Emma, do we have any apologies or substitutions?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Carlo Guglielmi, for whom Councillor Jack Henry is substituting, from Councillor Mike Steele, for whom Councillor Ian Grundy is substituting, and also from Councillor John Jowers, Councillor Mark Stevenson and Councillor Mike Hardware.
Members, would anyone like to make any declarations of interest? Councillor Thorogood?
Yeah, on the Ribbonall item, I'm feeling predetermined. But I should also add that I'm also a Braintree District Councillor, and there is, as yourself, there is a submission from Braintree District Council as part of that agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie?
On 5.2, I am the division member on this one, although I have not expressed a view, nor have I been lobbied on this particular application. I'm also a member of Basildon Council, which has made a submission and objected, but I've not been part of that submission. Also, I'm the chairman of the Tovey Residents Liaison Group, which is a neighbouring development, and part of my role as a county council, I'm the chairman of the group, which is just next door.
Thank you. Councillor Henry?
Just a bit of housekeeping, Madam Chairman. In relation to item 5.1, although I'm subbing today, I was a full member of this committee 2017 to 2020. So I was lobbied extensively in opposition to it then. It didn't impact my decision making then, it doesn't now, but I just thought I'd mention that. And like Councillor Mackenzie, item 5.2, I'm an elected member at Basildon Council. I'm a cabinet member there. The Basildon Council has submitted a response to that paper.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Just for noting, members, I'm also a member of Braintree District Council since May this year, and also the Speaker, Mr Staines, is known to me as he is a fellow Braintree District Councillor as well. Same as Councillor Plale is as well. Thank you. Are members happy to agree with the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June 23rd of June 2023 are a correct record and for me to sign them? All agreed? Anybody against? Thank you. We go on to item 4, public speaking. Emma, do we have any public speakers?
Thank you, Chairman. For item 5.1, we have Mr. Michael Staines. He's speaking on behalf of the group Parishes Against Incinerator, against the application. We also have Councillor Paul Thorogood speaking as a local member and Councillor Ross Plale speaking as a local member. For item 5.2, Phoenix Freight International Limited, Swinburne Road, Basildon, we have Mr. Gerald Price. He's speaking on behalf of the applicant for the application.
Thank you. We now move on to item 5.1, land at Rivenall Airfield. We will now consider item 5.1, land at Rivenall Airfield. Members are asked to note the addendum, please, to the agenda which you have in front of you, particularly regarding the change to the recommendation. And I will now hand over to Claire for her presentation. Claire. Thank you.
Yes, this item is in relation to Rivenall Integrated Waste Management Facility, which is often known as the IWMF. As the chair mentioned, there is an addendum to this item, and I'll refer to the main changes as I go through the presentation and draw your attention to those changes. Rivenall IWMF is located east of Braintree, just south of the A120, and the nearest villages are Bradwell, Silver End and Coggeshall. I'm going to give a bit of a background to this application because Rivenall does have quite a long and complex planning history. Planning permission was first granted for the IWMF back in 2010 by the Secretary of State following a public inquiry in 2009. And the IWMF consists of a number of elements. It consists of a combined heat and power plant using waste as its fuel to generate power and heat, a materials recycling facility, which was to sort waste to recover recyclables such as paper, card, plastics and metal, the residue going into the combined heat and power plant. There was to be a market de-ink paper pulp plant, which would reprocess waste paper both imported to the site and recovered through the materials recycling facility, and was to use heat and steam from the combined heat and power plant, the CHP plant, to power it. There was also to be an anaerobic digestion plant, which was going to treat food and green waste to create biogas to generate electricity. And there was also to be a mechanical biological treatment plant, which is a process that takes waste and takes out the moisture and shreds it for use as a refuse-derived fuel in the CHP plant. The materials recycling facility, the mechanical biological treatment plant and the paper pulp plant and the AD plant were all to be housed in a double arch building to be located partly below ground in a void created by mineral extraction. The CHP and other associated infrastructure was to be located to the rear of the building. So this is one of the drawings approved as part of the planning permission and it shows the site. The access comes in from the north, which you can see hopefully me pointing to. This is the location of the building, which is to be constructed, and then the CHP was to be located at the rear. The next slide is an artist's impression of the cross section. So this is looking from the top picture is looking from the north towards the south and shows the front elevations of the two arch buildings, which were to house the various elements, with the CHP stack to the rear. And then this cross section is a side-on view with the stack at the south, and then you can see the building in front. Since the planning permission was granted in 2010 by the Secretary of State, subsequent applications have been determined by Essex County Council's Waste Planning Authority. I don't intend to describe all the applications, but just focus on those relevant to the current application. In 2015, an application was made to amend the layout and capacities of the various elements of the IWMF and submit details to discharge a number of original conditions. At that stage, the planning permission had not been implemented. The 2015 application increased the capacity of the CHP plant or energy from waste plant facility from 360,000 tonnes per annum to 595,000 tonnes per annum and reduced the capacity of various of the other elements. The changes did not result in any increase in the overall amount permitted to be imported to the site, which is limited to 835,000 tonnes per annum, or increase the number of HGV movements to the site. The application was approved in March 2016, and the planning permission was technically implemented shortly after, but then did not progress. In 2018, Indiva took over development of the IWF from the original developer, Gent Fairhead and Company, and in the winter of 2019-20, preparation of the site started ready for construction. So construction is now progressing and is anticipated that CHP or energy from waste element will be completed by spring 2026. So this is a photograph taken on the 14th of July of this year, and you can see the construction of the site. I'm hoping, because that doesn't quite give it justice, this is a short video standing in the southeast corner of the site, panning round to the north. And just gives you an idea of the stage of construction on the 14th of July. The bit in the foreground at that point is where the CHP would be located. You can see that the sides of the void have been stabilised. And the large void that's being constructed now, you can see in the photo now, is where the waste bunker would be, and also some of the equipment associated with the IWMF. And it's the green fencing is because that's taken from what's known as the information hub, which has a balcony that overlooks the site, so that with a small office, so that the construction can be viewed. As I say, the planning permission was submitted in 2015 was determined in 2016, and at that time additional conditions were added, and one of these was condition 66. The condition sought to address the situation that planning permission was implemented, but then not progressed, because at that time there was no environmental permit. The condition required a plan of action to either rehabilitate the site or for an alternative use to come forward, and the plan of action was required by September 2020. As the construction of the IWF is now actively progressing, the original purpose of condition 66 has fallen away. However, rather than be in breach of the condition, the applicant Indiva submitted a plan of action in September 2021 and proposed 3 different options for the plan of action. One was to build out the permission as authorised by the planning permission. The second option was to build out those elements within the consent which are technically and commercially viable, or within the building which currently has consent, and or submit an application for consent for alternative waste management or energy generation uses. The plan of action was considered by this committee in February 2020, and condition 66 was discharged, approving option 1 only and imposing 2 additional conditions. The first condition was imposed to make it clear that in developing the site, the planning permission was still subject to all the previous conditions and obligations. And the second condition required that all elements of the IWF were constructed and brought in prior to the CHP facility being brought into beneficial use. It also required the construction of the IWF was completed by December 2026. Indiva subsequently appealed the decision on condition 66, considering the decision to be unlawful, particularly the second condition requiring all elements of the IWF to be built and completed by December 2026. A public inquiry into this appeal is planned for October 2023 this year. The applicant has subsequently submitted the current application to vary the planning permission, deleting condition 66, the details approved thereunder, and the associated conditions. And that is the application that is the subject of this report. In terms of the site's location, I've already explained it's East Braintree. I don't intend to go into the detail of what's set out in section 2. In terms of its location, the application doesn't propose any physical changes to the external appearance of the development or change any physical impact such as noise and dust. And so I don't consider that there's a need to go into the detail of the site location. That, having said that, I will point out that Airfield, the site is located on what was Rivernew Airfield, and the area was subject to sand and gravel extraction, which has created the void in which the IWMF is located. The IWMF site is also allocated in the Waste Local Plan 2017 for both management of non-hazardous biological and non-biological waste. The access to the site is shared with Bradwell Quarry. There is a purpose-built access onto the A120 and a private access road that extends south, crossing the River Blackwater and crossing 2 minor roads to reach the Bradwell Quarry processing area. As part of the IWMF permission, the access road has been extended south to the IWF site, and these works have been completed. So, oops. I'm sorry, apologies. Oh no, there it is. So this is taken within Bradwell Quarries processing area. So, and the road going off into the distance on the right is the access heading south towards the IWMF, which has been constructed for the IWMF. This is a little bit further along. You can see the route, and in the far distance, you can see the construction works of the IWMF. And then this is the access just as it comes into the IWMF site, and you can see the cranes of the construction of the IWMF. So as explained, the proposal is I've explained briefly before, that the application is delete condition 66. The details approved under condition 66, the details approved under condition 66, and the two conditions imposed on that approval. As explained, one condition imposed as part of the approval of condition 66 was that was the approval of option 1, which was to build the IWMF as permitted, subject to all the conditions and legal operations. The second condition imposed on the approval of condition 66 was that the IWMF in full should be constructed and the energy from waste facility not operated until it was completed. The full wording of the two conditions is set out on pages 53 and 54 of the agenda. In terms of consultation on the application, Braintree District Council has provided a response and explains its previous original strong objections to the IWMF, but acknowledges the Secretary of State's decision. But does note that the IWMF would be the largest single emitter of greenhouse gases in the district. The District Council acknowledges that the purpose of the original condition 66 has fallen away as the IWMF is now under construction. However, Braintree District Council remains of the view that given that time has passed since the original decision in 2010, the current development should be subject to a new planning application. The site is located in both Bradwell and Kelvedon Parish Councils. Bradwell Parish Council has raised no comments. Kelvedon Parish Council, Coggeshall, Rivenel and Ferring have all raised similar objections, namely that the developer should be required to deliver all elements of the IWMF, not just the CHP energy from waste facility. And if that not all elements of the IWMF are going to be developed, then a new application should be submitted and the matter considered afresh. Also, that they're concerned that the removing of condition 66 will lead to uncertainty as to what will be built. The local member for Braintree Eastern has also objected, raising the same concerns as the parishes, but also raised concern that the application should have been accompanied by an EIA and that the screening that was undertaken with respect to EIA was carried out incorrectly. In terms of representations, there is a note in the addendum that there is a change to this. When I wrote the report, we'd only received 13 letters of representation. I received a significant number both on Thursday, last night and this morning. So at the time addendum was printed, there were 72. I'm aware that in my inbox, I think about another 5 or 6 have arrived since the addendum was published. I have glanced over them. They raise very similar points. And the only one point I would add is that one representation does refer to the Coggeshall Coggeshall neighbourhood plan. The representations are summarised in the report and in the addendum. One additional representation that we've received since the report is from Parishes Against Incineration, known as PAIN, and the additional points, as I say, are raised. But just to summarise, the points that have been raised. It is requested that the application was refused and that the conditions imposed as part of condition 6 to retain are retained, and that the Waste Planning Authority continues to defend the appeal, requiring all elements of the IWMF to be developed, particularly as it's considered that the other elements of the IWMF provided benefits which offset the negative impacts of emissions from the IWMF, which is considered important in view of the continuing evidence on climate change. PAIN has also taken legal advice that considers the recent case law that I referred to is not relevant to the appeal. The legal advice, however, has not been provided to ECC. Comments have also been raised that ECC were wrong to conclude that an environmental statement was not required to be submitted with the application, and that the decision on the EIA screening opinion should have been referred to the Development and Regulation Committee. Turning to the point of the screening opinion, I'll deal with this issue now. The County Council has given delegated powers to officers to undertake EI screening opinions. So it was perfectly acceptable for officers to deal with that matter and issue a screening opinion. In the report, it explains that a third party made a request to the Secretary of State to issue a screening direction. And that's where basically they're asking the Secretary of State to give a view as to whether they consider the application should have been submitted with an environmental statement. At the time of writing the report, we hadn't got that decision of the Secretary of State. However, that was provided to us on just after the publication of the report. And the Secretary of State has confirmed he will not be issuing a screening direction, i.e. that he doesn't consider that the planning application is required to be supported by an environmental statement. That has a slight impact on the recommendation, and the recommendation has been amended in light of that knowledge of the Secretary of State's decision. Representations have also referred to the potential for the application to be called in. Anybody can make a request to the Secretary of State to call in an application, and that's where the Secretary of State will determine the application as opposed to the Waste Planning Authority or this committee making the decision. The Waste Planning Authority at this stage is not aware of any call-in request to the Secretary of State. However, if there was a positive resolution today, and if it became aware before we issued the decision that there had been a call into the Secretary of State, the decision will not be issued until such time as the recommendation of the Secretary of State on that call-in was known. Representations have also referred to other developments that are taking place. In particular, there is a pre-application consultation stage currently being carried out with respect to a nationally significant infrastructure project with respect to Rivenhall. And that is an application which is seeking to increase the energy output of the site from 49.9 megawatts to 65 megawatts. That's something that the local authority can't determine and has to be determined through an actually significant infrastructure project, which is considered by the planning inspectorate. Another development that's also been mentioned by representatives is the potential for greenhouses to use both heat and CO2 from the site to be located next to the IWF. Neither of those proposals are at application stage yet, and as there is no planning permission, they have no bearing on the determination of this application. So turning to the consideration of the application to remove condition 66, the details approved thereunder and the conditions imposed on condition 66. The original purpose of condition 66, as I've alluded to, condition 66 was imposed to address the eventuality that the IWF was implemented technically by doing a certain amount of works, but not actually constructed. And that was a possibility at the time the condition was imposed because there was no environmental permit. And it's highly unlikely that any developer would construct a site which they weren't certain could actually be operated, which wouldn't be the case unless they had an environmental permit. The condition required a plan of action for rehabilitation or an alternative use and had to be submitted by September 2021. As explained, a plan of action was submitted in 2021 because the developer didn't want to be in breach of the planning condition, and that submission was considered in March of 2022, subject to conditions. The IWF actually obtained its environmental permit in June 22. And as you've seen, the IWF is under construction, such that the original purpose of condition 66 has fallen away. So just to clarify what was approved under condition 66. So we approved the option 1, which was the IWF should be built out as permitted, and the approval was subject to the 2 conditions. One, that it should be built in accordance with the conditions and the obligations of the original planning permission, and the second, that it should be that all elements of the IWF should be constructed and the construction completed by 2026. And as I've explained, the applicant has appealed that decision because in their view, the conditions that were imposed are unlawful. The appeal is currently to be heard in October 2022. So there has been a change in circumstances since determination of condition 66 in March of 2022 in the form of additional case law. This case law is known as the Hillside case. And this case law clarified that non-completion of a project for which planning permission has been granted, i.e. partial implementation, does not make development carried out so far unlawful. And this has clarified government guidance, which states, conditions requiring a development to be carried out in its entirety will fail the test of necessity by requiring more than is needed to deal with the problem they are designed to solve. Such a condition is likely to be difficult to enforce due to the range of external factors that can influence a decision whether or not to carry out or complete a development. Without prejudging the appeal, it is likely this case and the guidance will be taken into account by the appointed planning inspector at the appeal. In light of this case law and guidance, and in discussion with the appellant and Braintree District Council, who are all 6 parties to the appeal, it was agreed to consider resolving the matters the subject of the appeal by the applicant applying to delete condition 66, and that is the subject of this application. So what's the consequences of deleting condition 66 with respect to planning control? If condition 66 were deleted, there would be no specific condition requiring all elements of the IWF to be constructed and no specific timeframe by which construction should be completed. However, the Waste Planning Authority remains of the view that the planning permission for the IWF was for an integrated facility. The IWF was considered to be sustainable in the context of the National Planning Policy Framework because of the benefits of integration. For example, the materials recycling facility providing the last opportunity to recover recyclables prior to incineration, and then co-locating the paper plant with the IWF enabled direct use of heat and steam, which is a more efficient use than just power generation. However, it is acknowledged that the paper market has changed since 2010, with more online working and home working reducing paper usage. The applicant is exploring other options for the heat and steam, such as the greenhouse proposals. As explained earlier, the National Planning Policy considers planning conditions requiring completion of a development are unreasonable because not all factors are in the control of the developer. While the Waste Planning Authority acknowledged the above, it remains of the view that the Secretary of State in determining the planning application, the original planning application, and determining the 2050 application took into account the integration of the facility and how this contributed to delivering sustainable development. Without the integration, the IWF could be a standalone energy from waste facility. However, it has to be recognised that the sustainable development is made up of three dimensions: social, economic and environmental. The applicant at this stage does not consider elements of the IWF are financially viable, therefore impacting the economic sustainability of those elements. Nonetheless, even if condition 66 were deleted, the IWF can only be developed in accordance with the planning permission. Representations have raised concerns that the deletion of condition 66 would lead to uncertainty as to what would be built. The developer can only build what is permitted. It is unclear at this stage what elements will not be built apart from the IWF plant, but the planning permission sets out what can be built under the planning permission and is controlled through conditions, including condition 2, that sets out the details of the approved plans. Unless, of course, an application is made to approve something via future applications, either by way of a planning application to the Waste Planning Authority or to the Secretary of the State in terms of an NSIP. Any such application would need to be considered on their individual merits at that time. The local member of Braintree District raised concern that application should not be considered by a minor material amendment application, often referred to as a Section 73 or variation application. As explained, the Waste Planning Authority remains of the view that planning permission is for an integrated facility. Condition 66 only reinforced the sequencing of its specific terms. Removal of condition 66 does not change what is permitted, and therefore a minor material amendment was appropriate mechanism to delete condition 66. Braintree District Council, several representees and parish councils have objected to the application on the basis that if the development is not going to be the full integrated facility considered by the Secretary of State in 2010 and again by the Waste Planning Authority in 2016, then a new application should be submitted and considered on its merits afresh. At the current time, there is no tangible position to claim Indefat are not lawfully implementing the extant permission. There is no breach of plan control and therefore no justification to require a new planning application. However, should Indefat build out and beneficially operate the energy from waste facility alone, further advice may be needed as to whether a breach of planning control exists at that time. So to move on as to what environmental impacts would arise from the deletion of condition 66. I would reiterate that while deleting condition 66 will remove specific requirements to build all elements by December 26, it would not change what is permitted to be developed. Building less than permitted is likely to result in different environmental impacts, but is not likely to result in greater environmental impacts than had been considered as part of the EIA process in 2010 and 2015. However, further advice on this position may be required depending on what elements are built and operated. So the relationship of this planning application and the outstanding appeal. Currently, the applicant has appealed the decision on condition 66 with an inquiry planned for October 2023. At the time of submitting the application, the applicant had indicated they would be willing to withdraw the appeal if the application were approved. In view of the clarifying case law explained earlier, as part of the preparation of the pending planning appeal, counsel's advice had been sought, and their view is that the Waste Planning Authority's case has been undermined by recent case law. Defending such an appeal will require significant staff and financial resources. It is not considered in the wider public interest that the Waste Planning Authority provide any additional evidence bar that already provided within the February 2022 committee report and the submitted statement case would justify its position in relation to the pending appeal. As explained, the Secretary of State has now issued its screening direction and the council is free to issue a decision in this respect. However, if it was ruled to be granted today, a decision cannot be issued immediately due to the need for the legal agreement. The appellant has therefore indicated that unless the decision can be issued in time to ensure there is no need to progress the appeal, they will progress with the appeal and the public inquiry in October 2023. It is considered in view of the Hillside case that in any event, the Waste Planning Authority should not continue to participate in the public inquiry other than relying on the evidence already submitted, and it would not be in the wider public interest to do so. As I've explained, there is a legal agreement already associated with the Rivermore Planning Commission, and if planning permission were resolved to be granted today, a new planning permission would be issued. And in order to ensure that the original obligations associated with the original planning permission remain associated with the new planning permission, there would be need for a deed of variation to the legal agreement. So in conclusion, the deletion of condition 66, the details approved thereunder and the conditions would remove the specific requirement to build all elements of the IWMF prior to operation of the energy from waste facility, and that all elements should be constructed by December 2026. However, recent case law has clarified that partial implementation of a planning permission is not unlawful, and thus conditions associated with condition 66 are considered unenforceable. However, it should be emphasised, removing condition 66 does not allow the developer to build anything. It's still required to comply with the planning permission and the conditions that seek to minimise its impacts unless changes are applied for and approved by the Waste Planning Authority or the Secretary of State. It remains the view of the Waste Planning Authority that integrated waste management facility was permitted as an integrated facility, and that without integration of all the elements, it would not deliver the benefits of integration, and as a result would deliver less environmentally sustainable development. If the energy from waste plant is brought into operation without the other elements, the IWMF, then further advice as to whether there is a breach of planning control will be needed. As a screening direction has now been issued by the Secretary, the Waste Planning Authority is free to issue a decision in this respect if the application was resolved to be granted. There is still the potential for a third party request that the application could be called in for the Secretary of State for determination, and should such a request be made, then a decision to grant the planning permission would not be issued until it was confirmed the application was not to be called in. So the recommendation is the recommendation set out in the addendum, which takes account of the Secretary of State's notification with respect to the screening direction. And it's there are two parts to the recommendation. Firstly, that planning permission should be granted, which is the removal of condition 66. That the Waste Planning Authority, as long as the Waste Planning Authority are not notified that a third party request has been made to call in the application, the recommendation is approval subject to that there is no request to the Secretary of State for a call in, that the decision is subject to a deed of variation being completed, and that the planning permission is subject to the conditions as set out in Appendix A, which is the original planning conditions updated, taking account of any discharge of conditions or non-material amendments that have been made since the last issuing of the planning permission. And the second part of the recommendation is if the appellant fails to withdraw the appeal into condition 66, that ECC should not present further evidence and not provide representation at the public inquiry.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. Can I just add to the addendum and the recommendation? Could I just add to 13.1A? It should be a planning permission be granted subject to the following: that the Waste Planning Authority are not notified by the Secretary of State that a third party request has been made to call in the application. Sorry, it says at the end by the Secretary of State. And normally what we would do is we'd get a holding direction issued by the Secretary of State. So this is not just a notification that a screening request has been made, it's a notification from the Secretary of State that we shouldn't be issuing planning permission until they've come to a decision.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right. Thanks, Claire. I will now call on our first public speaker, Mr. Michael Staines, speaking on behalf of the group Parishes Against Incinerator, speaking against the application. Mr. Staines, you have 3 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak at today's Essex County Council Development and Regulation Committee meeting. The applicant changes will be detrimental to the environmental balance, so essential to the original application being passed, which is what Claire's just outlined. I speak as a representative of Payne Parishes Against Incinerator in the same capacity as I attend the Rivenhall Integrated Waste Facility liaison meeting. I've watched your work in this committee Save Forever on YouTube and note your frustration with this process. And I record for posterity that in this month, July 2023, the planet recorded its hottest temperature for over 120,000 years, a phenomenon linked to the burning of fossil fuels, including waste. Please use today's opportunity to lead officers and residents to a safer place where developers respect their elected local planning authorities. The committee has sought to effectively manage the twists and turns of this development for many years, and Claire alluded to many of those earlier. And this latest appeal challenge is to be expected, and many more are likely to come from this developer in the future. Again, for posterity, a future potential enforcement test will be the breach of a condition that the incinerator will have no visible plume. We believe this condition is significantly more likely to be breached as the developer seeks technical changes to meet the significantly greater than 50 megawatt generation capacity as it pursues national infrastructure status and shakes off control of this committee and Waste Authority. It's suggested that this committee continues to show its determination to manage this ever-changing for the worst development, seeking to deliver the goals of the County Council and fighting the developer's appeal. It can do this in the safe knowledge it will have the full support of national, local resident groups, the local council and MP. That's the public interest we should be considering this morning. Council, Lead A, was engaged by Payne and details why the hillside judgment is not relevant and will not be sufficient for the applicant to avoid following the conditions previously applied by the committee. This is not a housing development. This is a significant environmental issue. I do note, however, that this has not been shared with ECC to date. I'll take away that action to remedy it. This committee should also consider using 20.15 of the Essex County Council Constitution to call in the officer decision made on the 19th of May 2023 not to screen for an environmental impact assessment of the revised plan. The negative screening decision by officers was made without consultation with this committee.
30 seconds.
And it did not include the Colchester Neighbourhood Plan, not statutory. The Essex decision not to screen, cited by the Secretary of State as a reason to refuse a separate environmental impact assessment called in by Payne for residents. Essex County Council does not need the consent of the developer to undertake a new environmental impact assessment, and a positive screen decision will enable this to happen. It's been over a decade since the last one. The committee and officers will be aware that it took years and 3 attempts by the developer to secure the coveted environmental agency permit in June 2022.
3 minutes.
Thank you, current and future viewers.
Thank you, Mr Stone. I'd like to now call on our second speaker, Councillor Paul Thorogood, speaking as a local member. Councillor Thorogood, you have, I don't need to tell you this, but you do, yeah.
When I've spoken, do I withdraw to the back?
Yeah. You have 3 minutes and the clerk will let you know that you've got 30 seconds remaining. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a new meme, or meme, as some people call it, being shared on social media, where a hotel guest phones down to reception and asks, "I'd like a wake-up call, please." And the receptionist replies, "The 7 hottest days on Earth in the last 100,000 years all happened in the last week." I'll get on to why you should reject the officer recommendation to accept the deletion of condition 66 later. But first, I want to remind you that the record-breaking UK heat experienced in 2022 will be regarded as a cool year by the end of this century, and that's the UK Met Office warning this week. Already, this year's June 2023 was the hottest June on record for the UK. This summer, the Mediterranean is on fire, high temperature records are being broken all around Europe and North America, sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic are at an all-time high, and the melting of Arctic sea ice is accelerating. Yesterday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned the era of global boiling had arrived, after scientists confirmed July was on track to be the world's hottest month on record. "Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning," he said. "It is still possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees and avoid the very worst of climate change, but only with dramatic immediate climate action." Immediate climate action? That necessitates a drastic cutting of carbon emissions by 2030 and hitting net zero well before the current target of 2050. The building and operation of the Rivenhall incinerator flies in the face of this and policies on climate change. Once operational, it will be the single biggest source of CO2 in Essex. Officers are recommending that the committee approve the removal of condition 66, enabling the construction of an incinerator without the condition integrated waste management recycling facilities. These other facilities, paper recycling, food waste and composting, were deemed the mitigating factors to the incinerator and should be constructed in accordance with the original decision. Officers will tell you the Supreme Court's Hillside case ruling means if this committee rejects their recommendation and Indermaur appeals, Essex can't guarantee winning and could incur costs. Hillside bears little resemblance to Rivenhall's condition 66. Hillside was concerned with successive and mutually inconsistent planning permissions granted for housing on the same site. And Rivenhall is concerned with a permitted industrial integrated waste management facility that the developer says is unviable due to changes in the markets. It's like comparing apples with oranges. The application to delete condition 66 should be tested in the courts, or if the market for the IWM has changed, Indermaur should stop building the incinerator and submit a brand new planning application for a new facility that should require a new environmental impact assessment based on today's scientific knowledge, not that of pre-2010.
8 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I've only got 3 sentences. By not building the paper recycling part of the consented plant, the overall facility can no longer be classed as combined heat and power on the heat side. Paper pulping requires the heat. That is surely a material planning consideration if there ever was one. This committee needs to wake up to climate change, stop hiding behind planning officer recommendations, stop phrases such as difficult decisions and our hands are tied. You need to be brave, do the right thing and reject this officer recommendation to stop Essex and the world sleepwalking towards climate change disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll now call on our third speaker, Councillor Ross Plale, speaking as a local member. Councillor Plale, you have 3 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So when the request to remove condition 66 came before this committee back in February 22, I gave credit to the committee and to Essex Council for taking back control on a continued lengthy process which has seen mission creep from various proponents of this development for many years. At the time, it was stated that it was the view of the Waste Planning Authority, having taken legal advice, that the operation of the energy to waste facility alone would require different justification and consideration if the heat and steam were to be used directly. And indeed, as we've heard multiple times this morning consistently, the original plan commission for the site was given on the balance of the whole package with the IWMF and the lesser impact on the environment facilities. It was made clear to this committee back in February 22 that air quality, noise impact and the impact of the water environment may be different depending on the nature of a standalone waste facility generating power, which would require reassessment. Officers highlighted during that meeting that this reassessment would be most appropriately take place via a new planning application supported by the environmental impact assessment, and that the Environment Agency may also require a new environmental permit. As part of the debate that took place that followed, Councillor Kane highlighted that this was purely the developer trying to cherry pick the good bits of the original planning application. And Councillor Harris added that as a common sense person, how can people out there, the residents, how can they have confidence in us if we're allowing a plan of action to take place, which isn't a plan of action at all? It's incredibly disappointing we find ourselves back in this situation now, with this council is once again debating whether to facilitate and justify planning creep that the local residents have had to put up with for too long. In the past 18 months, we've come to learn of further details of how Endeavour intends to diverge from the original planning application, including growing lots of tomatoes and increasing the energy output of this site. Yes, these proposals in themselves require fresh planning applications, but it is once again highlights the uncertainty that residents have had to put up with again for too long. I welcome the response from Braintree District Council, which is frank in its assessment correctly in my view, as was the original view of officers, that this administration, that this is now a fundamental change in what is being proposed and very different to the original planning permission that was granted. As BDC highlights, a single new application appears to be the only sensible way forward in which residents, stakeholders and statutory bodies can properly consider and engage in the proposals which are now before us and consider them in the context of the current national and local planning policy framework.
30 seconds.
If the developer is confident in their scheme, they should have no hesitation in lodging a fresh application, and this council should stand by its original ruling and uphold the conditions it originally imposed on granting approval of this site.
Would you like to address those?
Yeah, just a couple of sort of process things. If the application that's now at pre-application stage, which is a national significant infrastructure project, that's determined by the planning inspector, but if a positive decision were issued on that, it does actually come back to the local authority to actually administer that in terms of planning control, enforcement of planning conditions. Councillor, it was also mentioned that the screening opinion wasn't carried out correctly. A screening opinion is a formal process whereby every planning application has to be considered whether it is development that is required to be supported by an environmental statement, i.e. it's gone through an environmental impact assessment. And a decision on that has to be issued within 3 weeks of a planning application being made. So a screening opinion, the decision on screening opinions has been delegated to officers, partly because there's unlikely that we'd be able to get to committee and get your view on a screening opinion within that 3 weeks. And if you don't do it within 3 weeks, then they don't have to do an EIA if you did consider it needed one. So the authority carried out a screening opinion and formally concluded that it didn't need an EIA. Then, as I explained, a third-party request was made to the Secretary of State, which is where somebody doesn't agree with the authority's decision. And the Secretary of State reviews that and takes account, goes through the process themselves and then decides whether they consider it needs to be supported by an EIA. And in this respect, they have concluded the same as us, that it didn't need an EIA. So that's how the screening process works. I just reiterate that while removing condition 66 removes sort of some specifics with respect to what can be built, how the site gets built out, it still has to be built in accordance with the planning permission. And if we get to the point where we believe they're departing from the planning permission, then we'll have to review that situation. And if that's when they start operating the plant and there has been no changes to the planning permission, then we'll have to reconsider the position at that stage as to whether there has been a breach of planning control and take advice appropriately. So that was really all the points I wanted to make.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the important point here, Madam Chairman. It's this Rivenall's always been a complicated issue and it still continues to be. This case, if you like, is about the lawfulness of the condition, not the wider principle about what should be built and what shouldn't be built. Our view is unchanged as a waste planning authority that planning permission exists for an integrated waste management facility. It's just that at this stage, the energy from waste facilities being constructed and the other elements are, even though the developer's been open and honest that it may not be economically feasible for the other elements in the future. This is a point about whether planning permission exists for what's built and operated in the future or not, and we've yet to reach a decision on that. It may be that further applications are made down the line to include greenhouse development to take the CO2 and heat. Or materials recycling facilities, but those applications haven't been submitted. So it's a bit hypothetical at this stage and we can only deal with what's in front of us. So ultimately, this is about the lawfulness of the condition. That's pretty much it, even though the policy's view on the wider principles of whether sustainable waste management will be built or not remains as it was when we previously considered this issue. That's unchanged.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Members, I'll now open it to the floor for questions. If anybody's got any questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just a bit taken aback by the suggestion that they should abandon what they're doing, I suppose, in a way, and reapply for a whole new planning permission over condition 66, which, from what I've heard this morning, we've got no grounds to refuse that because the case law. So I've just a little bit bemused about why they need to abandon the current development over one item, condition 66, when there's case law which says they're entitled to abandon a section. Yeah, you can't stop them abandoning different sections, but when does it fall foul if they keep abandoning bits? But it's a commercial decision, isn't it? But, am I making sense?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I mean, this is, simplify this. If you have planning permission for a house and a garage and you were on it and then you only decided to build a house, then the question is whether it's acceptable to abandon the garage. But at the end of the day, it depends on what's been granted planning permission. And in this case, what we're saying is planning permission exists for an integrated waste management facility, not just an energy from waste facility. It's a holistic permission and it was considered on that basis, and it was considered to represent sustainable waste management at that time, the point of issuing planning permission. There is nothing at the minute to stop that energy from waste facility being built and constructed, and you've seen the video that outlines that, and that's pressing ahead. That has planning permission. The question is whether everything else has to be built or not. Our argument is that has the planning permission, and that's what should take place unless there were changes are made down the line and a further application is granted. But any further applications will have to be subject to the tests that exist at that time and the policies, and those policies around sustainable waste management and consider climate change impact, which is where the policies are. So
just to comment on that.
Yeah.
We've got case law now which says they're entitled to abandon a part of that development. As you say, if they don't want to build a garage, they don't have to build a garage.
Yeah.
So I can't see how we can argue against that and refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connor. Councillor Henry?
They're not looking to go forward with this paper pulping recycling aspect. What's the reason for that? Is that can we expand on that demand you mentioned earlier on with this group different times?
It has been discussed at the liaison meeting, so I'm only reporting what's said at the liaison meeting. But the argument is that that paper pulp plant was proposed back in 2008. And the world has changed a lot since 2008. They don't consider that there is a paper market that would actually warrant constructing that paper plant. I mean, I just know from our experience here in Essex is that now we work from home. I don't generate the same amount of paper. Everything is much more online now. There isn't the same office paper generation that there used to be. And so their argument is that element of the paper pulp plant, there just isn't a need for it anymore.
Okay. I mean, I think, Madam Chairman, you would imagine as local districts and boroughs get their heads around this, and it's hitting everybody. They're all playing catch up now with how they handle their waste and how they handle their recycling. You would imagine there'd be a good few changes yet to the amounts of stuff that we do. I mean, I think for me personally, I've always found that the issue with recycling and waste is the fact that we just generate too much of it to begin with at the start of the process rather than at the end. I mean, this shirt comes with 16 pieces of useless nonsense that fills a bag and goes off in many different directions. Not one of them reusable, and yet it could come into the shop just as easily on a wire hanger. So there's a real problem before it even gets to us, the consumer. I think the viability aspect, I'm not surprised it's not viable. We have a house building company at Basildon Council and it's, nothing's viable. So I wouldn't be surprised if we'd see more changes, more adaptations. I guess it would be what they bring forward. I very much like the idea of actually growing crops, growing products there. I don't have a major issue with the removal of this because I think if it's something that we can't argue this case law about it, I see no problem with the removal.
Councillor Steptoe?
A couple of points. Not far from where I live, we have a landfill site. They've had to extend the life of the landfill site simply because we're not generating enough rubbish to fill the hole up. So there has been a lot of changes, certainly over the last 10 years. Just on a point of clarification, the Secretary of State has the right to call this in. just to clarify, regardless of our decision today, he can, if we refuse it, he can grant it. If we grant it, he can refuse it. Is that correct?
Well, it's unusual for the Secretary of State to call in an application that's been refused or recommended to be refused, as far as I'm aware. But it is certainly the case that any party can ask for the application to be called in. The Secretary of State will consider that and then again either let the local authority determine the application or call it in for his determination.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, did you wish to speak?
Yes, I do. Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Where do I start, really? For me, 15 years, a long winding road, as it were, with lots of additions, changes, etc. I just worry about this in front of me because no obligation to build that extra facility, because at any time, if they're allowed to do this, what could happen is that some way down the, as you've already admitted, Mr. Green, is that down the road, there could be further changes that remove parts of these. And for me, that's not what was originally decided as the environmentally sustainable development. Unless you have the whole package together, it worries me that you won't get what you originally achieved. So I don't think I can support this technically. I really can't, because I think that following this over the years and reading this all read and look at the opposition that's in the background papers here, I just worry about where we're going with this. I don't want to be sitting here another 10 years, if I am sitting here for another 10 years, and seeing more changes come along in that period that actually take other elements out that make it not environmentally sustainable, because anything that does that I couldn't support. So I don't think I can support this yet.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak? No? So members, we have 2 recommendations in the report. Would anybody like to propose a recommendation? Councillor Garner, you proposing it?
Yes.
Seconded? Councillor Henry, thank you, members. So I'll now put that all to the vote. Those in favour of the recommendations as in the addendum with just the extra words that Richard put in as well by the Secretary of State. All those in favour, please put your hands up and show. Those against? Abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. That's carried.
Thank you. Thank you, members.
Figures, Chairman.
I'm sorry, 5, 1 and 2, I think.
So there is 5 for, 1 against and 2 abstentions. Okay, Councillor Aspinall. We now move on to 5.2, which is Phoenix Freight International Limited, Swinburne Road, Basildon. We now consider this item, Phoenix Freight International Limited. Members are asked to note the addendum to the agenda, particularly regarding to the change to proposed condition 10. And I will now hand over to Claire for her presentation. Thank you, Claire.
Just trying to get this into what I wanted to do. This is
Councillor Aspinall leaving.
Maybe just stepping out.
it's all right. This week or something. Oh, we go. I'll fly through them.
Councillor Aspinall sometimes has to put eye drops in your mouth.
Okay, but if they're not here.
All right, shall I wait?
All right, okay.
I go and have a look.
Councillor Henry's just going to look for Councillor Aspinall.
Dig around and see.
She's gone to.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, no worries. This is an application for a waste transfer station at Burnt Mills Industrial Estate, Basildon. There is, as the chairman mentioned, an addendum to this item where we do a small change to the recommendation, one of the conditions in the recommendation. So the background to this application is the site is it has been used by Waste-Away, the applicant, since June 2020 as an operating centre for HGVs associated with its other waste transfer stations, and also as a vehicle maintenance area. In June 2020, Toby Eco facility located just north of the site closed. Prior to this, South Essex District Council waste collection vehicles travelled directly from their collection rounds to the Toby Eco facility. With the closing of Toby Eco facility, this meant longer journeys to the disposal facility at Colchester landfill. So both Basildon and Castle Point District Councils contracted Waste-Away to provide transfer facilities, and Waste-Away established a transfer station in April 2022. And the facility at that time obtained an environmental permit from the Environment Agency. The operator, in seeking to increase the throughput capacity of the site, became aware that the existing waste transfer facility did not have planning permission to operate. And so the current application is seeking to regularise the activity that's already taking place and to increase the throughput capacity. So as I've said, the site is located in northwest Basildon, as you can see on this slide, that it's just a small black area in Burnt Mills Industrial Estate. And the site, so you can see this is the A13. Well, now it's gone. It's gone off. It's very slow to respond for some reason. Right, this is the arterial road, and this is Burnt Mills Industrial Estate, Coulthard Road, and this is the location of where the old Toby Eco Park was, which is now actually gone. And then this is Swinbourne Road to the south of the site. So it's really slow to react. Oh, there we go. Oh, I think I've gone one too many now. So as I said, the site is located just south of Coulthard Road here, and between Swinbourne Road here. The site consists of a yard with a warehouse building on the west side of the site, with access at the southern end of the building and car parking for staff at the southern end of the site. The site can be accessed from Coulthard Road in the north, actually via a roundabout that also served. I do apologise. This is not reacting well. It also served the Toby Eco Park when it was operational. So this is the access in the north, and that access is an in access only. So you can only come in via that access. Vehicles can't exit. But the access on the southern end of the site onto Swinbourne Road is both an in and out access. This is a photograph of the roundabout at Coulthard Road with the access into the site. You can just see the access going in here. And this is on Swinbourne Road and the access on the southern side of the site with the warehouse building, and you can see the offices here and the car parking for staff at the front of the site. This is within the actual yard with the building on the left side of the photograph with the weighbridges and the yard. The site is surrounded by various uses. To the northwest, there's a concrete batching plant just located here. And the yard to the west of the site is actually used for the storage of new tractors. And to the northeast, is bounded by warehouse buildings, and then to the southeast by Noble Square, which is a complex of small business units with parking and an access road that actually runs between the site and the business units. The site lies within an area designated for employment use within the Basildon District Local Plan, and is also designated as an area of search for waste management in the Waste Local Plan. So the proposal seeks several elements. Firstly, to retain the HGV operating centre that was there prior to the waste transfer station, also to retain the HGV maintenance facility, which is housed in part of the warehouse, to regularise the existing use of the waste transfer station, and to increase the capacity of the waste transfer station from 775,000 tonnes per annum to 120,000 tonnes per annum. As I've explained, the waste transfer station mainly serves local authority collected wastes, but the applicant would wish to have the flexibility that they could also serve both commercial and industrial non-hazardous waste if circumstances were to. The hours of the waste transfer station itself would be from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. with operation on a Saturday and public holidays 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. with no transfer on Sundays. And the HGV maintenance element would continue as it has previously, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Saturday. And the HGV operating centre has in the past operated 24/7, although in the majority of cases, most of the vehicles leave on a Monday around 7 o'clock and actually don't return to the site until either Friday or Saturday morning. And there are 25 HGVs associated with the HGV operating centre. At 75,000 tonnes per annum, the waste transfer station generates about 156 movements a day, 28 in, 28 out. And at 120,000, that would increase to about 240 movements a day. With the HG operating centre, that increases to about 265 movements a day, which tends to only occur on Mondays and Fridays when the operating centre HGVs arrive and leave. 6 staff would support the waste transfer station, and there are 17 other staff on site related to the HGV operating centre and maintenance, so that would generate a further 46 movements. The proposal does include 33 parking spaces, which includes 2 disabled parking spaces, 2 electric charging points, and areas for cycle parking and HGV parking in the north of the site. As I've explained, HGV access would be from Courtauld Road and exit via Swinburne Road, and staff would access and egress from Swinburne Road, which is closest to the staff parking areas. The warehouse has been subdivided, separating the HGV maintenance area from the waste transfer station. The waste transfer station building itself is fitted with fast actor roller shutting doors, such that when the vehicles are either loading or unloading waste, the doors are closed. The policies relevant to the application are set out in section 4. With respect to consultations, Basildon Borough Council hasn't made a number of comments. It acknowledges that the waste transfer station is needed for the South East districts due to the closing of the Toby Eco Park. However, it requests that the planning provision for the waste transfer station be temporary on the basis that Essex is about to develop a new waste strategy and therefore circumstances might change. We've also requested a temporary permission on the basis of this would encourage having a facility like this discourages recycling, reuse and waste prevention, and raises concern about traffic movements and also the proximity principle with respect to disposed of waste. However, if planning permission was granted, Basildon has also suggested a number of obligations and conditions, which I'll explain in more detail. The Highway Authority has raised no objection, subject to conditions. We did receive, we haven't received any other objections, but one of the county members for Pitsea did request that the application should be determined by the committee, but in view of Basildon's comments, the application would have been determined by the committee in any event. 107 properties were notified of the application, although all those properties notified were of commercial nature, and there are no residential properties within 250 metres of the site. 2 letters of representation were received, one in relation to the potential dust and smell that might arise and how that would impact staff in terms of both physical and mental health, and another representation raising concern about additional HGV traffic in the industrial estate, as it considers there are already existing issues with parking of vehicles in the estate roads and blocking of accesses. So in terms of appraisal, in terms of the need and policy considerations, as it mentioned, the site is allocated in the local plan for employment and is an area of search within the waste local plan. So there is no requirement for the applicant to demonstrate need. That said, the need for the waste transfer station has arisen due to the closure of Toby Eco Park, and by having transfer facilities for South Essex districts, it negates the need for waste collection vehicles to travel all the way to the disposal point, reducing waste miles. The retention and increase in throughput of the waste transfer station would allow the applicant to continue offer waste transfer facilities to Basildon and Castle Point, and the opportunity to offer transfer facilities to other districts and other commercial businesses subject to contract. Basildon Borough Council has requested that Planning Commission be temporary due to the fact that ECC is developing a new waste strategy in conjunction with other district councils, but it is understood that this waste strategy is unlikely to be adopted until at least 2024. As I mentioned, Basildon Borough Council also considered that a temporary commission would incentivise waste reduction, reuse and recycling. Both the county and the district are seeking through various means such as curbside separation, separation at household waste recycling centre and other initiatives such as Love Essex to encourage reduction, reuse and recycling. It is considered giving a temporary planning condition would have minimal impact on moving waste up the waste hierarchy. And also the facilities used for bulking up of, not only used for bulking up a black bag waste, but also for bulking up a recycle, which without this facility might not take place and could go to landfill. It is considered no justification for a temporary planning permission. The site is allocated for employment use and is an area of search within the waste local plan, and therefore there is no required to demonstrate need both in the short and long term. The applicant has requested the use of the waste transfer not be limited to local authority collected waste, as circumstances may change, allowing the transfer of non-hazardous commercial industrial waste. In terms of suitability of the site, policy 4 of the waste local plan seeks to ensure that the waste use is compatible with surrounding uses. No new buildings are proposed and all the waste transfer activities will be contained within the building, and the site is largely screened on all sides. It acknowledged that the proposals are not within the untidy industries allocation within Basildon local plan, but as all the activities are inside and there are no sensitive businesses adjacent or residential property, it is not considered the use would be incompatible with the surrounding uses, subject to development not giving rise to adverse environmental impacts, which I will now consider. The most likely impacts arising for the waste transfer station are noise, dust and odour. As explained, all waste transfer takes place within the building and the site will be subject to an environmental permit administered by the EA. The environmental permit controls pollution and includes restrictions on retention times from waste to help manage odours. While concern has been raised by adjacent business that there might be noise and odour, no complaints have been received by the Waste Planning Authority or the Environmental Health Officer at Basildon Borough Council since the site started operating in April 2022. In terms of traffic noise, the site was previously a freight distribution centre, such that there was likely more HGV movements than currently proposed, and thus noise generated would not be dissimilar with the current proposal. It is therefore considered subject to conditions to control hours of working, ensure the site is kept clean and dampened in dry conditions. There is no justification to refuse the application on noise, dust or odour grounds. In terms of highway and traffic, Basildon Borough Council raised concern that the facility would lead to an increase in traffic in the area. It has to be recognised that all the South Essex waste collection authorities were travelling to Tovey Eco Park via Coulthard Road before its closure in June 2020. Thus, many of the waste vehicle movements were already occurring along Coulthard Road. Basildon Borough Council has also raised concern that the proposal do not accord with the proximity principle, i.e. dispose of waste close to its source. There is no disposal facility in South Essex that could provide an alternative. Without the waste transfer station, Basildon and Castle Point waste collection vehicle would have to travel further if they were to take the waste direct to culture to landfill, and that would actually increase waste miles. Concern has been raised by local business that additional HGVs would give rise to congestion and access being blocked in the industrial estate. The waste transfer station has adequate parking within the site for both HGVs and staff vehicles, and access for HGVs can achieve directly from Coulthard Road. The Highway Authority has raised no objection subject to conditions with respect to access, circulation and parking. It is not considered the application could be held on highway safety or capacity grounds. In terms of the conditions and obligations requested by Basildon Borough Council, they requested 2 financial contributions. Planning legislation stipulates that obligations must be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to the development, and fair and reasonably related to scale and kind of development. One financial contribution was sought for sustainable transport. The site is in an allocated employment area and would not give rise to significant numbers of staff movements justifying additional bus, cycle or walking provision. The site without the benefit of planning permission could be used for more intensive use. A planning permission has only been sought because the waste is a sui generis use. No contribution has been sought by the Highway Authority. It is therefore not considered the request for a financial contribution for sustainable transport meets the tests set out in planning law. Basildon has also sought a financial contribution for employment and skills plan. The applicant has confirmed they already provide training and apprenticeship schemes, and refusal of the application will result in the loss of 9 jobs. EC guidance to developers on contribution only requires an employment skills plan where new employment floor space is created. No new floor space would be created by the proposals, as such a contribution is not justified. It is considered neither of the financial contributions are necessary to make the planning application acceptable in planning terms. Basildon Borough Council also requesting conditions on a number of matters, and you'll see in the report at pages 106 and 107 that I have addressed each of these matters and proposed conditions where appropriate. For example, requiring details of any additional lighting, ensuring attention of the proposed cycle parking, disabled parking and electrical parking spaces. So in conclusion, the principle of the waste transfer station is acceptable given it is a site within an allocated area for employment within the Basildon District Local Plan and an area of search for waste management in the Waste Local Plan. It considered the environmental impacts can be adequately controlled and that proposals are not incompatible with surrounding uses. It is therefore recommended that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions and the amendment in the addendum with respect to condition 10.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for a presentation there. Can I now call on Mr. Gerald Price, please? Speaking on behalf of the applicant. Speaking for the application. Mr. Price, you have 3 minutes and the clerk will tell you when you have 30 seconds remaining.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning to you all. I'd just like to speak briefly in support of our application with 3 points. Firstly, just a little background about us. Wasteway is the contracted bulk waste haulier to Essex County Council. We move all of Essex's household waste from your transfer stations and ours to the final disposal points. We're a significant employer and a significant investor in people. We offer high quality, well-paid jobs in the Basildon area and offer good training and development opportunities. From a standards perspective, we are the only UK bulk waste haulier to have achieved earned recognition status from the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. This is the highest possible accolade a haulage company of any type can achieve, and it requires consistently to meet both vehicle and driver compliance standards, which exceed all statutory requirements. Secondly, addressing the partially retrospective nature of this morning's application. We received poor advice when the transfer facility was established, and this only came to light when we sought further advice to increase its capacity. We are extremely sorry for this oversight. We have a strong compliance ethos in our firm, and there was never any intention to circumvent rules. Our first customers were local authorities, so we hope it would be clear there was never any intention of quietly operating in the shadows. And hopefully to provide some additional comfort, our relationship with the Environment Agency is very good indeed. We've had several unannounced inspections of the facility over the last 2 and a bit years, and we've always scored maximum marks for facility operations, housekeeping and management. And also hope that it's been borne out by the fact there have been no complaints either related to the waste or our vehicles in those 2 and a bit years of operation. Finally, just on the matter of need, the closure of Tovey has left an infrastructure hole in the south of the county, and we hear of no plans from ECC to remedy that. We currently service 2 local councils. We actually serviced 3 for the first 6 months of operation. Our site was never under any pressure. It's been very carefully designed, so there's no risk to vehicles queuing onto the highway or any other kind of local blights. And we're currently actively engaged with Essex County Council in their consultation process for this autumn's residual waste disposal procurement. Our proposal is to offer ECC an opportunity to re-secure, if you like, all the logistics benefits associated with Tovey by providing a convenient and easily accessible location for the 4 district councils of South Essex to deliver their waste. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to engage this morning and the planning officer for their fair and objective engagement with us during this application, and we look forward to continue to be a significant member of ECC's waste supply chain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price.
Thank you.
Members, I'll now open the floor for questions. Councillor Steptoe.
Yes, with regards to the phrase temporary plan permission, is that for, say, a 5-year period? Is that would be the intention? What does temporary mean?
The application is for a permanent facility. It was requested by Basildon that it should be a temporary facility, but I don't consider that's justified because the site's an employment site and allocating the waste local plan. They don't need to justify need both in the short and the long term, and therefore it's a permanent facility. Whether it remains there is obviously the company's choice, but the planning permission would be permanent.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
Jimmy. Sorry. My only concern was obviously the increase in vehicle movements, heavy vehicle movements, and whether there was enough space on site to accommodate all lorries coming in. And the gentleman did say that there is no problem at the moment with lorries queuing up on the highway. Could we be a little bit reassured, if that's the case, that there won't be a build-up of lorries waiting to get into site?
There's enough capacity on site for 25 HGVs to be parked up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Just quick question on the entry and exit. Why can't the exit be on the roundabout as well?
Honestly, I don't know. I assume it's to do with capacity issues on Coulthard Road, but when it was granted consent to have an access off of the roundabout, it was given an in only, and I assume it's something to do with the flow of traffic along Coulthard Road would possibly cause problems if there was an out as well. But I don't actually know why it's not an in and out, I'll be honest.
It seems a better place to exit rather than on the industrial estate, that's all, from my knowledge of the area. I mean, generally, I think the application is generally a fairly good one. It's already in operation. I've never had any complaints as a division member for the area. I do have some sympathy with the temporary planning permission from Basildon Council, but can understand your points on that. I'm not sure where they were going on the money for the bus routes, because there are no buses that go down that road. So they wouldn't be able to improve the service. They'd have to get First to come in and give them a service, which I don't think is going to happen. I don't understand the points on the employment and skills, because obviously it's existing site and the jobs are already there. So I mean, I'm generally minded to support this application, and I think if this wasn't there, we could end up with something probably worse and more detrimental for the area. So yeah, I'm minded to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I'd second that. That's your proposal. I mean, it is what it is, isn't it? It's an industrial estate. It's untidy. I've looked on Google Maps. I do apologise for that, but because it looks an absolute. I wouldn't want to live there because nobody does, because it's an industrial, it's where people go to work. This regularizes the system, I think. I've seen on Google Maps just 2 years ago, the maps I was looking at there were cars parked on footpaths, cars parked on muddy grass verges, half on the road, half not, lorries parked everywhere. So I like the reassurance that we were given, both in words and by the speaker, that there's enough car parking on site, which is Councillor Garnett's point. I just wonder whether the cars parked there are perhaps lorry drivers from other places that have dumped their car there while they walk to their, the commercial vehicle and then drive away and then come back in the evening to pick up their car. But there's no traffic regulation to stop that, and it is what it is. All I'm concerned about is what's in front of me. As Luke says, as far as I'm concerned, if there's enough on site for cars and lorries to park within site, I'm content, and that's why I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I don't think you formally moved it, did you, actually?
I was just making comments, but
I'll take that in a minute. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. With regards to the point of the vehicles coming out onto the roundabout there, as an HGV driver, I can see that would be quite difficult to turn into the roundabout with a 40-foot Arctic. So my guess is that it would be sensible to keep the flow going out through the other way. In the absence of it, I'm happy to propose that we accept the recommendation.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Henry.
No, well done.
Okay. Thank you. Well, members, it has been moved and seconded, and as amended in the addendum which you have in front of you. All those in favour, please could you show with hands? Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. That's carried.
That's carried.
Thank you, members, for that. We now move on to item 6.1, which is land on the southwestern side of Ashwells Road, Pilgrim's Hatch, Brentwood. And Sean Long is going to present this for us. Sean, over to you when you're ready.
Madam Chair. No problem. In February 2022, the Waste Planning Authority was notified about the potential importation, depositing, storing and spreading of waste materials on land at Ashwell Road, Pilgrim's Hatch, Brentwood. I'd first like to just draw your attention to this referral. It just gives you the overall extent of the land concerned. As you'll see from the photograph there, that the majority of the material was only deposited within the northwestern part, although the enforcement notice did cover the whole parcel of land itself. I was going to show you, so that's how the site looked originally in February 2022. So sort of mixture of builders' rubble, soils.
Sorry, am I going to get in anybody's way? Is that okay?
Just need to see it, Barry.
Yeah.
Okay.
As it's my division, my ward.
Right.
Making sure it's the same place.
That's just to give you a context of the site, how it looks from Ashwells Road itself down to sort of most of the materials sort of tucked around the corner. And we'll just move on. Initially, obviously, the Waste Planning Authority attempted to remedy the breach of planning control informally and requested cessation of activities and clearance on land with an initial deadline set. The landowners subsequently requested additional time, suggesting the works related to clearance of the site. However, both the original and the extended deadline, end of March, came and passed. And that is how the site looked after that deadline in April. It was then obviously considered expedient to serve the enforcement notice in an attempt to formally remedy the situation. That was served on the 1st of June, with removal and remediation required within 4 months. An unannounced visit was conducted in December, which confirmed no further waste material had been imported. But however, it did appear potentially a limited amount of waste had been removed, but the majority remained. As such, it was considered in part that the enforcement had not been fully complied with. The Waste Planning Authority have continued to conduct monitoring visits with no activities occurring or further importation, with the access to the site from off Ashwells Road secured by locks gates. The waste material import and deposit still remains, and accordingly, the land has not been restored. In January 2023, following further communications with the landowner regarding the failed compliance, the landowner stated personal circumstances and events delayed their ability to comply. However, stated they remain committed. Based on the landowner's renewed willingness, the Waste Planning Authority agreed not to take any further action in respect to enforcement until after the 31st of March 2023 as another opportunity to rectify the breach. However, this window passed without any meaningful progress. And the next photo gives you an idea of how it looks to date, and that's an April 2023 picture, and that's not changed since then. The Waste Planning Authority consider the landowner has had more than ample time and opportunity to comply with the requirements of the enforcement notice, and is as such considered that the Waste Planning could seek to advance a prosecution. In consideration of the prosecution policy appended to the local enforcement site monitoring plan, concerns are raised whether the prosecution would be in the public interest. When assessing the public interest factors, there is no specific means to enable this to be scored, and this is based on the weight of all the factors to make an overall assessment. Breach of planning and control continues to cause harm to the green belt and the landscape character and appearance of the area. However, the situation is stable with no additional being imported since the original breach was identified 16 months ago. However, the outstanding harm caused is considered only of local significance. The waste materials are not considered to pose a significant environmental risk, and ultimately a prosecution would not assist for WPA's main aspiration here, which is for the remaining waste to be removed and the site to be restored. Therefore, the recommendation is that at the current time, no further action is taken by the Waste Planning Authority in respect to the breach and the extent of enforcement notice relating to the subject of no further importation taking place. The enforcement notice will remain on land, and the Waste Planning will continue to monitor the site practically, working towards compliance with the extent required to enforce the notice with the parties involved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sean, for an excellent presentation. Councillor Aspinall.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank the officers for their attempt to ratify this situation. It was at times absolutely abhorrent to the local residents. At times we were having up to 15, 20 lorry loads of waste, unknown waste, being deposited on the site a day. It's a very, very narrow rural road that we locally cherish. And it was being destroyed. The grass verges were being eroded daily, and mounds of discarded, well, all matters of waste were being piled up in the site and against the neighbour's fence, who wasn't very happy. And the people opposite this site were very unhappy as well. Our officers have been persuaded that this chap will mend his ways, stop doing what he's doing, and the photographic evidence in front of you suggests that maybe that's happened. He is of traveller extraction. And any reasonable conversation our officer might have had with him bears no, I think in reality, that actually has happened or will happen in the future. The chap concerned has buried, he's got a JCB, and he's been tracking around the site, burying as much as possible, and going opposite into what was Ashwell Sports and Country Club, digging up the tennis courts and burying the stuff over there. The reason he can do that is because his mother lives there. And that was his grandfather's site, and there's all sorts of problems going on. Locally, our enforcement officers have been down there to try and do something about it. But I am disappointed that we are recommending no further action, because the River Weed starts just a few hundred yards away from where this is. There is a pond there that the water from that eventually makes its way into the River Weed. They've got unknown amounts of materials, unknown types of materials now buried in the ground right beside this water course, and it raises lots more concerns. I can't see anything wrong with prosecuting and asking for that to be returned to its perfectly green and pleasant field it was before he moved on there several years ago. So I would like to move that we take enforcement action, Madam Chair.
I'll second you.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Likewise, I was going to second it. I think we need to make a stand on these issues, because unless we do, more and more this will happen. It's happened in the past. I can think of a site not too far from where, in Rochford, where it went on for years and years and years, never got dealt with. The question I would ask, though, is if he's been burying stuff, there's one thing levelling the site and putting it back to green surface, but what about the stuff that's been buried? Have we got a way of monitoring that? Because, as Aspen says, it's near to a source of a water course. We don't know what's leaching through. Has that been protected? I know from experience that Barling Tip, it has to be lined and all sorts of things to stop that leach getting through. So have we got the power to go back and make sure he digs that up and removes that as well?
Sure.
Thank you, Councillor. Effectively, from the evidence that we have got, and from what I've seen on site myself, I've seen no actual evidence of burying of waste. Obviously, I can't guarantee that, but from what I've seen, the material that's been imported has generally been spread across with further piles put on the top. And in terms of obviously the leach aid and the water next door, obviously no evidence that there's any contamination coming out. As such, anything like that would be dealt with by the Environment Agency. Of course.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Just on the comments of burying waste, I think that's what pushed it for me. Someone burying waste, it doesn't sound that someone who's going to comply or making efforts to comply. What it sounds like is they're trying to cover their tracks. So I think I would definitely support enforcement on this particular application. I'd also ask that it may be the investigation be expanded further, because I think Councillor Aspinall just said a site opposite the road is affected, the social club, and it looks like waste burial has been going on there as well. So perhaps further investigation is to expand it.
Yeah, I'd just like to again reiterate that there is no evidence of burying. Some material that I think has come from here was originally possibly came from across the road itself. I believe as well that area is also subject to development of housing, which is with Brentwood. So the sort of hope and aspiration here is that potentially with development of that would enable them to clear the land with which we're concerned about here today. I'd just also like to add that while obviously board members are more than happy to change the recommendation, prosecution does not require them to remove that material.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, sorry, you've taken me by surprise. So you say the prosecution doesn't require them to remove it?
No, there's no specific requirement that can enforce them to remove that waste. It will.
Yeah, so I feel we should take some action, but let's get some meat on the bones. Perhaps Jackie can help us there. Jacqueline, if we go to court, and what sort of order do we get? If he gets fined, can we put a charge on his house? Is that the route?
Fines on prosecutions are payable to the state, not to the county council. So the motivation is someone will comply because they don't want you to prosecute them again and again and again. Those of us who can remember when Sunday trading was illegal, you got fined for every Sunday they opened, but it was still worthwhile them doing. So that's the motivation usually. The only other option is injunction with specific performance or direct action, which would require Richard Greaves finding some money in his budget to actually physically do the works, and then it could potentially go as a charge on the land. So it's none of these options are straightforward, which is why we have the enforcement protocol, which says we'll employ these things. Sean's obviously been monitoring the site for a bit, whether you give him a bit longer to monitor it before you look at some formal activity. But in terms of direct action, that's quite a hard one, and it's quite intensive, money intensive as well as anything else.
So, sorry, Chair, can I? So if we win the case, we don't get any money out of it. Is it something that staff can do, or we've got to have a barrister, or obviously not a QC, but to go to court? So the cost to us is X.
Well, obviously, what would usually happen is Sean and the planning team will put together a pack of the evidence they've got, which will go to the prosecutor and our office in the ELS. So yes, that's internal to see whether they feel that there's something that they could prosecute. And whether Sean would need external assistance to do that, say information from Environment Agency, other material, etc., etc. It can go to a magistrate's court, it can go to a Crown Court. If it went to a Crown Court, I suspect it's more likely we might need some external legal support. Magistrates court, and they're limited on the fines they can give. So once the evidence is looked at and which is looked at, that choice would need to be made.
Okay, thank you.
Should you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, Jacqueline's right. Normally, if we were successful at prosecution, found guilty and a fine possibly imposed. But I have known cases where the judges sent the defendant away to remedy the situation and then come back to court to see if that situation, has been resolved. So there are cases that are within the gift of the judge at the time, so whether it's in the magistrates or the Crown Court. In this case, the recommendation is there based on what we consider limited harm, but it's quite within our gift to continue with the prosecution. We've advised it's possibly not in the public interest at this stage, but we completely accept there's a criminal offence currently being committed because you haven't complied with the enforcement notice. The enforcement notice remains with the land until it's complied with. So in effect, that there is a charge hanging over that land. So the landowner can't necessarily do anything with that land given that enforcement notice is in place. But we'd have to instruct Essex Legal Services on the case and then take it from there.
Thank you. Councillor Henry.
Thank you. I mean, it worries me. It worries me that we have a toothless system that not only doesn't bring any money to us if we do fine him, but also doesn't actually make him do anything with the actions that we've already got. I'm happy and content that there's still an injunction on the land, but I think maybe rather than to move a motion to say that we do go for prosecution, that maybe what we could possibly do would be defer it and actually find out exactly, because if we've got Sean saying that from the 6th of April earlier on, this is the state of the land and there's no evidence that it is being buried, and yet we've got Councillor Aspinall, the local member, saying anecdotally, locally, there's plenty of talk that it is being buried. Maybe we need to find that out before we ever enter into prosecution, so we know what it is that we're trying to prosecute at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Aspinall.
Yes, Madam Chair. Sean's predecessor had evidence given to him by local residents. I don't know where that's gone. Photographic evidence of diggers being used, residents taking photographs. The police were called on several occasions. Fire brigade have been there on several occasions. And it's just a total mess. I don't know whether us taking prosecution will cease the actions now, but at least it's the first block, it's the first step on a way. If you have a list of how many times this guy is breaching our rules and regulations and is not compliant, surely that builds up in the court's minds that there's a problem here and something should be done about it. I don't know, perhaps I'm too naive, but I do know that definitely opposite, the old tennis courts have been dug up and a lot of the material that was there has been tracked across the road and deposited in the land. That also on the actual site. So I know there's a lot of, shall we say, hard luck stories being given by the applicant, sorry, the landowner to us about personal circumstances and all the rest of it, why it hasn't complied over, probably been doing this for the last 4 years. So I would urge us to take the first step, which is to prosecute.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Just in terms of evidence, the evidence for a prosecution will need once a criminal offence has been committed, and that's after the enforcement notice took effect. So we've got evidence of that. It's not been complied with. It's still on the land. So it's entirely with our gift to carry out a prosecution. And indeed, as Sean explained, we have been reasonable as a waste planning authority, giving the landowner plenty of notice and opportunities to rectify the situation.
Did you wish to add?
Other than that, obviously, just want to make the point of obviously, in terms of, I can look through back the old evidence to see if there is anything, but from what I've seen from the old photos, I haven't seen it myself to date. And the other point I was just making is obviously in terms of the recommendation itself, I just want to emphasise that although obviously it says no action is taken at the current time, it does also say that I will continue to monitor the site and proactively try and work towards compliance. And obviously, if there was further importations, then that would obviously go against this.
Chairman, I mean, if you continue to monitor the site, is there a time limit? Do we go on and on to on? I mean, how long do we monitor for before we get this land restored to its proper use?
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chairman. It's quite within the committee's gift to, for us to actually signal the concerns of the committee, communicate with the landowner and perhaps give another 4 weeks. Is that reasonable? 4 weeks for the material to be removed, otherwise we will instigate a prosecution as a final warning.
I just feel it needs something
to show we've continued to be reasonable there, but obviously we have the strength of the committee behind us this time, so there'll be a strong resolution if that was to be taken.
Thank you. Councillor Henry.
I'm absolutely with Councillor Grundy on this. I mean, I think we do need to set a limit, but I'm really, really concerned with the anecdotal that Councillor Aspinall's brought. I'm really concerned. If we can clear this, it looks lovely, and yes, haven't they all done wonderful, and it looks marvellous. But whatever they've dug a hole and put in a hole could be leaking into a river or water supply. I've got real concerns about not investigating that. we don't know what's coming on these 15 lorries a week or whatever. And, you know, if they have had a JCB on there, they're digging stuff and you've got oil leaking into the water supply or into the ecosystem. I think it's, you know, I don't want to be patting somebody on the back and saying, well done, haven't you done marvelously? You've complied with our instructions and it looks beautiful. It's all lovely and florid and everything else. And they're literally poisoning the local ecosystem.
Yeah, just on that note, Madam Chairman, what we will do in this particular case, we'll establish contact with the Environment Agency and see if we can carry out a joint visit as soon as possible.
Thank you.
And I was just going to point out on that you probably appreciate that the enforcement officer and the Environment Agency have rights to actually go on the land. Other people might not have been on the land, so whether that makes a difference to what people are observing.
Councillor Steptoe.
Yes, I'm quite happy for us to be reasonable within the situation of 4 weeks, and we can put the message out that we, after 4 weeks, we will prosecute. Just one quick question though, is if we do prosecute, can we go for costs?
There are cost provisions. That doesn't necessarily mean it covers all the costs.
No, but we can go for costs to cover the costs. So I think that's an important factor as well as a fine, because that does focus attention.
Councillor Garnett.
I'll go with the 4 weeks, I think, as a final. I'm not sure it's going to, we've done as much as we can so far. I'm not sure it's going to make him change his mind, but I think one last opportunity and then we go in, all guns blazing. That's the right word.
So Councillor Aspinall, are you prepared to change the wording of your recommendation to say that we will give another 4 weeks to comply with, and then after the 4 weeks, we will then prosecute?
Totally agree.
Is the seconder happy with that? Is that all right, Emma? Okay. So all those in favour of us giving the landowner 4 weeks and then prosecute if nothing's happened?
Yes, 7 and so that's carried.
That's carried, members.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. No.
Thank you. We now move on to item 7, enforcement of planning control update. We will now consider item 7.1, the enforcement of planning control update. And I will hand back to Sean for any comments he would like to make on this. Sean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any further comments to add, other than obviously if members have any specific questions about specific cases, please contact me outside the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Members happy to note this item?
Yeah.
Item 8 is applications, enforcement and appeal statistics. This item is just for noting. Are members happy to note this item?
Yes, Chair.
Yep, all agree.
4%.
Yes.
No idea, it was 100 at one time.
That's you, Councillor. Item 9 is the date of the next meeting, which is the 25th of August. And we have no urgent business, so I will now close the meeting at, I can't see because the light's reflecting, 12:18.